All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Ala. This is Objection, Your Honor, RC. I also teach Plateau Pulverizer LR, which is going to be pretty much right after this class. I won't be sticking around to answer questions today. I've got a midterm coming up, so I'm trying to be a little bit more, what do you say, efficient with my time, if you will. So I won't be able to stick around. At least I won't be able to stick around after Plateau Pulverizer LR to answer any questions. I apologize in advance. Always, though, you can email me if you're like hoping for any kind of insight on anything at all. Hopefully next weekend I can stick around a little bit, and most of you don't know. Yes, exactly. I was about to answer that question, Justina. I am in law school. I started, wow, 6 weeks ago now. And I am at Georgetown Law. So I just am now getting into my 1L year. It's quite an experience and it's quite a learning curve. So please, and thank you for being patient with me as I do that while I teach. But it is really, though, a joy, like such a joy to be spending time with you guys as a break from my reality, because I promise you that it really is a big, it's a big, what do you call it? Like, it's a huge plus point in my week. So there you go. Not actually Seattle to Georgetown, but I did grow up in the Seattle area, as you can see from the hat. But I moved here from California, so still a big shift. But all right, that's enough about that. Just a little note about this class. This is a newer class, Objection, Your Honor, RC. But the point of this class is to give you guys a framework to think about RC that's a little bit more helpful than just like read and answer the questions, which I think is definitely an acceptable way of explaining RC, but I present this in more of an analogy. So the idea behind this class is that you guys are lawyers when you read an RC passage. Your job is to listen to your client, the passage, right? To be there 100% fully present with the passage. And then after you've listened to your client, you're going to go to court, which is the questions. And you're going to have to say no to every stupid thing that opposing counsel is going to say about your client. So you essentially have to stand up and go, "Objection, Your Honor, my client didn't say that. I'm not picking that answer." All right. So if it's helpful for you to think about it that way, I encourage you to think about it that way, because ultimately RC comes down to two steps, in my view. First is to understand the passage, right? To listen to your client, to break down the information. But the second part, and it's, I think, equally important, is to protect your understanding of the passage. And I think more students tend to struggle with the first part, right, of like understanding effectively. But the second part can be just as challenging to students, where they're like, I get what happened, but they kind of, it's like running water through a sieve. It just kind of goes straight through. And students aren't thinking about how they read something and they now have to protect their understanding of the passage as they go through the questions. Oftentimes, they'll do what I call like infecting their understanding of the passage with wrong answer choices, right? They'll read a wrong answer choice and they'll start making a case for it instead of sticking with what they know is true and right, given what they read in the passage. So that's kind of the framework of this. Let me know if you have any questions about that. That's how I lead this class. And that's honestly how I'll talk about RC, whether you're doing it with me in this class or if it's, private tutoring, although I don't offer that right now. That's my way of presenting this. All right, so we're going to work through the passage together, and we're going to read it interactive style. So I'm going to ask for some volunteers, paragraph by paragraph, and we're going to figure out what the hell they're talking about, and then we're just going to have a conversation with the passage. This does not need to be complicated. This does not need to be overwhelming. The simplest way to tackle an RC passage is just to have a conversation with it. Go back and forth and be like, okay, you just told me this. What does that mean? Why do you think it's important? All right, so we've got 1, 2, 3 paragraphs. So we're going to do 3 volunteers. All right, we've already got some people. So Rich, and then we'll do Anna, and then Eduardo for the 3rd paragraph. So Rich, how are you doing?
just fantastic.
Awesome. I'm fantastic too. Ready?
Ready?
So I'm going to read the sentence to you, and you're just going to be like, all I think this is what it means. That's pretty
Okay.
much it. Yep. So you have the, well, let's say maybe the harder job, but also in a way easier because you don't have to think about the reading part of it. You're just going to be like, I think this is what they're saying. I think it's important because this might be the author's main point, or this is just context, whatever comes to mind. All right. The use of computer-generated visual displays in courtrooms is growing as awareness of their ability to recreate crime scenes spreads. What might that mean?
I mean, it just seems very basically introductory to this concept of a technological growth in courtrooms.
Yeah. And I'm also just going to make a note, if you're doing practice tests and you start reading something where you're like, this sounds kind of dated, just glance at the test number. This is test 49. So it's from a little while ago. So this is probably from like the 1990s or the early 2000s. So they're probably going to be talking about like very early computer technology. All right. But I think, Rich, you're absolutely right. This is just introduction. They're talking about using computer displays in courtrooms. Cool. Displays currently in use range from still pictures in series that mimic simple movement to sophisticated simulations based on complex applications of rules of physics and mathematics.
So again, kind of, discussing sort of the spectrum of how those are used, for basically like, I mean, it could be like scanned imagery, or I guess digital photography, to also animated simulations. So
Yep.
kind of introducing the gamut.
I think that's right. It's just more context. Awesome. By making it possible to slow or stop action, to vary visual perspectives according to witnesses' vantage points, or to highlight or enlarge images, computer displays provide litigators with tremendous explanatory advantages.
So I think this is kind of giving, I guess, kind of a little bit of support of why this is a good thing, or how it can be a powerful tool. At this point, it doesn't seem to be giving anything like whether it's good or bad. It's just sort of, it has this sort of advantage for the ability to zoom in, stop, slow, rewind, take different perspectives and stuff like that. So
Yeah, I mean, they're telling you the range of the effects that this can have on litigation or like trial proceedings. Okay. Soon, litigators may even have available graphic systems capable of simulating 3 dimensions, thus creating the illusion that viewers are at the scene of a crime or accident, directly experiencing its occurrence.
3 dimensions? Yeah, I mean, again, kind of queuing up, I think, maybe sort of a little bit of foreshadowing with this future potential capability.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of maybe immersive kind of experience for viewers, which I would, I'm assuming would be like jurors in this context.
Yeah, I like that. And now that we've got some context, question for you, Rich. What do you think might be good about this, and what do you think might be bad about this?
I have some experience with this, so I'm trying to not bring that into.
You're allowed to. If you have some experience and you're relating with it in like from the outside world, you're allowed to. In the sense of the passage, it doesn't need to like color the passage in any way. You're welcome to share stuff that you know from like your own experience. That's not going to mess up the passage, I promise.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I worked for Kawasaki corporate, and we had a lot of lawsuits for people who, the brakes weren't good enough, and so if the brakes were better, I wouldn't have crashed into that semi truck at 180 miles an hour on the first time ever using a motorcycle.
Right.
Kind of scenario. So we actually had a guy in our legal department who his whole job was recreating accident scenarios. So that's
wow.
So it was sometimes gruesome, but a lot of times it was very enlightening. But I think kind of where this is going is a sort of there's definitely like a visual impact when you see, like, even though that may not be your husband or your son or your daughter or whatever, like crashing into the tree going 90 miles an hour on a quad without a helmet on, and now they're unfortunately a quadriplegic, like, but to see that even in a ragdoll cartoony kind of way is pretty powerful imagery. So this idea that this illusion is going to happen, I think is definitely, like, potentially powerful.
I agree with you. And I think you touched on both of the things that we're thinking about, right? It's got a lot of power to it, but that can be a good thing and a bad thing. The advantages of computer-generated displays derive from the greater psychological impact they have on juries, not injuries, as compared to purely verbal presentations. Studies show that people generally retain about 85% of visual information, but only 10% of oral information. And I think that's AU, so I think that's like audio information.
So, I mean, in this case, kind of, I guess, furthering on what I just said, that idea that psychologically you see that happening and you can relate that to the person, the victim of a situation or whatever it was, that's definitely going to stick in your mind a lot better than if someone's just saying the events that happened on the intersection of, blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. If all of a sudden you're seeing, like, from all different rotating angles, a shooting of a situation, like of a crime scene, that all of a sudden your mind is going to have a much more potent understanding of what happened.
Yep. This is especially valuable in complex or technical trials where juror interest and comprehension are generally low. Okay. In addition, computers also allow litigators to integrate graphic aids seamlessly into their presentations.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit insulting to jurors, but at the same time, probably not wrong that this is going to give a chance for jurors to have a better understanding, especially, like I said, of technical or complex situations where words, just reading words of a transcription of events might be very difficult to, like, kind of wrap their head around, whereas seeing it in a simulation or stop action video definitely going to be more impactful. And and then being able to, like, I'm picturing, like, overlaying text, showing trajectory of bullets coming in from different angles with, like, the trace. You're all of a sudden you're like, you're going to be like, wow, okay, I understand why this is what it is, because I'm seeing all those different elements at once, and stop, pause, move forward slowly, whatever. So yeah, I feel like this is very supportive of this concept, in kind of a conclusionary sentence there. So I'll stop talking.
No, Rich, I think you did a great job, and I think you broke it down and you had a conversation with it, which is all we're looking for. You did an excellent job. I think, am I right that Anna's next? I forgot. Yeah, okay, Anna's next, and then it's Eduardo. All right, Anna, how are you doing?
Doing good. How are you?
I'm excellent. Ready?
Yes.
Despite these benefits, uh-oh, ding, ding, ding. However, some critics are urging caution in the use of these displays, pointing to a concomitant potential for abuse or unintentional misuse, such as the unfair manipulation of a juror's impression of an event.
Kind of goes back to what Rich was saying that it could really be very impactful. I find it interesting that the author said, intentional, like abuse and unintentional misuse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it seems like the author is about to give us some negatives about maybe this technology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anna, you've been in my classes for a little while. Are we going to fall apart because we don't know what concomitant means?
No, I think it I don't know what it means, but I feel like there's
Me neither.
context clues. Yeah, I think there's
Mm-hmm.
context clues. It's like concomitant potential for abuse. I feel like that sounds to me like I don't know. I'm picturing like a snowball, like
Sure.
mounting
Yeah.
potential.
Yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
have a three-step test for, not three-step test, three different tests for what happens when you don't know what a word is. And I feel like Anna, you've definitely heard all three of them. I think I'm going to make it four tests. And the fourth test, and I'm happy to go over what the three tests are. Do folks want to know what it is? I
Yes.
see nodding. Okay. Yeah. So the first test for when you run up against a word you don't know is the something test, where all you have to do is read the sentence with the word thing or something in place of the word that you don't know. So in this case, it would be, despite these benefits, however, critics are urging caution, pointing to some type of potential for abuse or unintentional misuse. What that does is it brings the context forward to you, because when you don't know a word, what happens is you fixate on the word you don't know, and then everything else starts to like go into the background. We want the opposite effect. We want everything in the background to come forward. So the something test allows you to bring the context to the foreground. That's the first test. The second test is the positive, negative, neutral test, which means all you have to do is just start with, you don't know what the word means, you can't trace it at all. Just start with, do we think it's a good thing? Do we think it's a bad thing? Or do we think it's just like an abstract neutral thing? Here, I think it sounds neutral to me, right? The potential for abuse part is negative, but the concomitant part sounds neutral to me. It doesn't sound like a bad thing or a good thing. It's just modifying potential, right? It's some kind of potential. The third test you have is etymology. Now, this is a hit or miss. I don't think this works in all occasions because etymology is a very complicated thing, and English is one of the craziest languages on earth. And I'm an ESL learner of English, and I like to this day, I feel like I'm like Nick from New Girl. I swear I've just memorized a lot of words. I don't think I know how to actually read. So it's one of those things. Like it's a very complicated language. But etymology in some scenarios can really help you. Like I was working with a student one time who was like, I don't know what illicit means. And I was like, well, what's the prefix? The prefix is ill. What's that telling you? That's probably telling you something bad, right? So sometimes etymology can be a really good key here. In this case, con is just like the opposite. Itant is like, I'm thinking about like, I actually don't even know. I don't think the breakdown of this one is very helpful for etymology, and this is where it'd probably be a miss. The fourth test, and I'm still thinking about this, so don't hold me to this, but I think I'm going to make it four tests for what happens when you don't know a word. And the fourth test is just remove the word. Just read the sentence without the word there. And in this case, it worked great. It's pointing to a potential for abuse or unintentional misuse. Nothing at all is going wrong for you when you don't know what that word means. All right, awesome. Back to it. These critics argue further that the persuasive and richly communicative nature of the displays can mesmerize jurors and cause them to relax their normal critical faculties.
I didn't expect the author to say these critics, so I guess, oh, some critics. I see. Okay, so that makes sense. That it's actually going to have the opposite effect of kind of what we were talking about. It sounds like these critics think that it's going to put people like iPad baby to sleep, or, you know, kind of like, oh, it's being explained to me, like I don't need to pay attention. I sometimes struggle with, I get caught up in the details. So if I ever do that, just let me know. But I think it's just giving us a reason that critics think that the displays are bad, right?
I love the iPad baby analogy. I think that's wonderful, right? When you get those computer generated displays, the impact is basically what happens when you hand an iPad over to a baby, right? Their brain just shuts off and they're just like, da da da, colors and the shapes and sounds, right? And I also want to point to something that Anna did, which I think is excellent. We read these critics, and then Anna was like, wait, what critics? And then we went back to the first half of the first sentence, which says some critics. All right. That kind of tracking is an extremely, extremely effective tool to make sure you understand what the subject of the sentence is, right? Like, what are they talking about? Because they will often say things like it, they, these critics, right? Which critics? Sometimes they'll talk about multiple groups of critics, right? So whenever you're like, you know, these people, or like, wait, which people? Which people are we actually talking about, right? They love to do that. And I can testify that every Supreme Court judge that has ever written an opinion on earth will do this to you. They seem not to want to reestablish subjects ever. All right. So they don't always tell you the subject. So it's really important to reestablish who it is you're talking about. And Anna did a fantastic job doing that. All right. This potential for distortion is compounded when one side in a trial does not use the technology, often because of the considerable expense involved, leaving the jury susceptible to prejudice in favor of the side employing computer displays.
Right. So the situation only worsens of the negatives of using computer screens only worsens when one side is using it and one side doesn't. And you know, it could have that, yeah, it could persuade jurors to side with one side just because of this. You know, they're not thinking about it, they just see the, you know, kind of associate it with yeah, kind of side with the other side that uses technology.
Yeah, I think so. I'm actually thinking about like any Parks and Rec fans in here. Me nodding. No, just a couple of you. Oh my gosh. Okay, well, you need to go watch Parks and Recreation if you are at all interested in public service, becoming a lawyer in any kind of, you know, outward facing way. That show is iconic. I wouldn't judge the first season. Definitely start judging it from the second season. They had a severe rewrite after the first season, but it's a fantastic show. But let's go back to Rich's example. You know, if there's a company, a massive, you know, manufacturing of cars or motorcycles company on one side that has endless resources, and there's, you know, a victim of a crash on the other side who's just like a regular person. One side uses these amazing, like this, there's a guy in their department whose entire job is creating these things. And then there's like a regular person on the other side. Ron Swanson should be everyone's hero. But and then you have a regular person on the other side who can't use like any of these things. Well, of course it's gonna create an impact. Awesome. And aside from the risk of intentional manipulation of images or deceitful use of capacity such as stop action and highlighting, there's also the possibility that computer displays can be inherently misleading.
Okay, so I guess the author's talking about the intentional use, and now he's introducing what happens if you unintentionally what did they say? s- like I'm forgetting English. Using it unintentionally harming the trial process, like intentionally intentionally you have more power, you have more capabilities, you're highlighting, you're stopping, you're bringing attention, but there's also something
Mhm.
about that's just inherently makes it flawed.
Yeah, I think so, right. And I think you're making a really good distinction here, because there's two things happening in this sentence, right? There's, on one side, you have like, like very horrible lawyers that are like purposefully trying to make somebody look bad. But then there's also people that are just trying to use it because they want their client to win. But there's something like, just even if you just start using computer generated displays, even if you have the best intentions in the world, you can still have an impact. As an amalgamation of data collection, judgment, and speculation, the displays may in some instances constitute evidence unsuitable for use in a trial.
Something about these the evidence that the displays are producing could not, yeah, I feel like that's what I would just take, right? Could be unsuitable for trial, but I don't know if I'm grasping the whole idea.
I think you are. I think it's much simpler than, what all the fanciness, the manipulation of events based on the interpretation of the presenter. Yeah, I think, Nick, that's definitely a part of it. But I think more broadly, they're also just saying like, hey, if you combine all these things, it's going to be unusable in trial. Like, we shouldn't be doing this in a trial.
Is that what the author is saying
And
shouldn't be? Or is it kind of
what do you think? I'm going to turn it back on you. What do you think? Do you think that like saying that may in some instances constitute evidence unsuitable for use in a trial, do you think that that's just like an objective statement, or do you think the author's like, hey, fam, like, if you're going to do this, some of it's not going to be a good thing to use in trial?
I want to say it's not one way or the other. I don't
Okay.
know. I want to say
If you had to pick, if you
oh,
couldn't be neutral about it, which one would you choose?
maybe the negative side of it, that it's may in some instances like harm,
Yeah,
right?
I think you're right, Anna, because just think of, I mean, I think this is something that students forget all the time. For some reason, students forget that like the passage is being written by somebody, right? Sure, it might be some LSAC writer, but if we're taking the subject of the person that wrote this, somebody wrote this, they care about this. Sometimes it's reporter style, right? Sometimes they're just giving you a whole set of information. They never have an opinion about it. That does happen. But they're telling you this, and they're telling you this with a lot of adjectives, right, Anna? They're giving you their tone as they tell you this. And it seems like if you had to put the author on one side, someone that's thinks we should definitely do this and it's totally fine, versus someone that's like, this has got some issues in it, which side would you choose?
Right.
The one over here. Yeah,
Issues,
exactly. Yep. Awesome. You did a great job reading. Eduarda, ready?
Yeah.
To avoid misuse of this technology in the courtroom, practical steps must be taken.
Okay, so when for me this is like the author opinion. He's like saying you must do this. So what we talked about in the second paragraph doesn't happen. So we need to take like these practical steps, and he's probably gonna tell us what the steps are.
Perfection. First, counsel must be alert to the ever-present danger of its misuse. Diligent analyses of the data that form the basis for computer displays should be routinely performed and disclosed.
So the first step would be the counsel knowing that maybe some problems will happen, that like there is some danger in the air,
Yep.
and that we need to analysis like closely to see what they are using as data, like how they are putting everything in the computer and what they are doing, like if they're putting wrong things or things to misguide the jurors. I don't know.
No, that's excellent. Basically, just like be aware. Judges who have the discretion to disallow displays that might unfairly prejudice one side must also be vigilant in assessing the displays they do allow.
So now, like, the author is talking about another group that are the judges and what they have to do.
Yeah.
Like, they need to analyze what they are allowing for people to present in court.
Exactly. Love that. Similarly, judges should forewarn jurors of the potentially biased nature of computer-generated evidence.
So another thing judges should do to like make them alert that some people could use this in like for not wrong reasons, but like misguiding the jurors to like vote for them. And
Yep. Finally, steps should be taken to ensure that if one side uses computer technology, the opposing side will also have access to it. Granting financial aid in these circumstances would help create a more equitable legal arena in this respect.
So like he's trying to put both parts of a litigation in like equal like in an equal balance to like if you have like a big corporation and a poor employee, so they like can like the poor employee can have some help to also create some visual impressions that can help them. So it would be like more equal, like a more equal dispute.
Exactly. I think you did a great job breaking that down, Eduardo. I think we were basically in this paragraph where like, hey, this is pretty screwed up, but if we're gonna use it, we have to be on guard.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think we did a really good job breaking down this this passage. So I'm not going to do a main point exercise today. I'm going to send y'all off to do the questions. Feel free to ask me any questions in the chat. I'm going to publish a poll for which questions you guys want to go over, and then we'll talk about those once you're done. Good luck. Remember that you did the work to understand the passage. You guys got this. take another minute or so to wrap up. All right, so looks like a lot of you guys crushed this. So congratulations if you did. We do have a couple that we were not super sure about. So looks like that's number 2 and 3. I'm also happy to talk about any other ones as they come up. So let's start with number 2. Which one of the following most accurately describes the organization of the passage? A lot of times students ask me, like, do I have to think about like what happened at what point? Do I have to think about, you know, the passage as having like structure to it? I mean, in a word, no. Like, you never have to worry about structure or organization unless you're obviously being asked a question that's about organization or structure. That's the only time when you have to stop and go like, okay, how did they, you know, do what they did? How did they get to the argument that they got to? So who wants to tell me what the before we even look at the answer choices, who thinks they've got just some plain spoken way of explaining what happened organizationally in this passage? Rich, did you want to take a stab at it?
Yeah, I mean, the part that I obviously was kind of thinking through was very introductory. And then it kind of went into some of the, you know, advantages, strengths, and then immediately it turned against itself and started talking about all these risks and dangers. But then at the end, it tries to, the author tries to kind of explain how it can be equitably or you know, somewhat regulated from a trial
That's great
perspective.
That's great. I think that's what happened here. It's essentially like, hey, this is cool. There's some good stuff about it, but there's also some real bad stuff about it, and here's how you can kind of get through it. Awesome. Like that prediction. All right, let's go into the answer choices. A, the popularity of a new technology is lamented. The key with questions like this, and this is probably not going to be the hardest question in the world, given that this was a relatively easy passage, but this is something you can note for any level of difficulty passage that you're dealing with, which is the key with these kinds of like long answer choices that like are quite similar to each other. The key is to bail as soon as it doesn't fit. Here, I'm going to bail after the first clause, because they did not start with the popularity of a new technology being lamented. They did not start like that, and I can get rid of it. The worst thing that's going to happen when I'm that aggressive is I'm going to eliminate all 5 answer choices, which is never a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. It means you're keeping your bar high. Anna, what's up?
The word lamented, I remember getting stuck on it before, so I didn't choose it because of it. But how would you do your analysis on this word if you don't know what it is?
Yeah, it's a little bit trickier because it just says is lamented, and that's the only information we have at the end of that sentence, right? I think if you didn't know what lamented meant, I think I would keep going, although I would draw your attention to like popularity of a new technology is something. Was it something in the passage? I don't think it was. I think it was more so like, here's a thing that's happening, right? It wasn't like I could put any positive or negative word in in the place of lamented, and I think it still would be wrong. Right? Because they didn't have like a strong opinion towards the technology. They just said like, hey, it's popular and it's kind of going around. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. So yeah, like they never qualified it in the first paragraph. The author doesn't qualify it as whatever it is this word could mean.
I think that's the real problem with it. And looking at the rest of it, I think I probably would struggle with it a little bit, at least, if I didn't know what lamented meant. But I think the first clause on its own is still wrong, even if we don't know what lamented means. Yeah, that's a good question, though. A new technology is endorsed. Did we endorse a new technology? No, I'm moving on. So if, by the way, you want me to talk about any part of the answer that came after I move on, just raise your hand and let me know, and I'm happy to talk about it. Be like, okay, why is this particular part of it wrong? Happy to do that. The reason I'm trying to be more aggressive about it is I'm trying to demonstrate to you guys how I literally sit up and go, objection, Your Honor, my client never said that they're endorsing a new technology. So that's not right. Does that make sense? So I'm trying to embody that for you guys. But if you're ever wanting to talk about more of the answer, I'm happy to do that. C, a new technology. Mm-hmm.
I was just gonna say, it's sort of shot down in the same way that A is shot down, like that very first thing. This technology is lamented, or it's something here in B, it's the technology is endorsed. Okay, but that's not true either. Like there was no like, this is the best thing that's ever happened to trials,
Right.
There was no sort of positive or negative. That first one's obviously negative. This one's coming across as being like super supportive, and that's also not the case. It's just very, very blandly introduced.
Yep. And I think to go off of Rich's point for you, Anna, for your question is, again, like, I think you could put anything after is in the first clause of A and it would still be wrong, because here it's just is endorsed and that's still wrong. And if you didn't know what endorsed meant, if you didn't know what lamented meant, you still could get rid of A and B. C, a new technology is presented as problematic. When I was reading with Rich, I don't think we ever got a tendency about it being problematic. I think we talked about it and we asked ourselves questions. So we were like, hey, this has a lot of power, so potentially it could be problematic. But that's our analysis, right? They never gave us any indication to think that it's problematic. So can't pick C. D, a new technology is introduced as useful. Okay, maybe. I don't love useful, but I don't hate it either. I'm not sensing a ton of resistance there, so let's keep reading. Potential problems associated with its use are identified. Well, they did do that, right? They said, hey, there's a thing, and here's some stuff about it that might go wrong. Recommendations for preventing these problems are offered. I think that sounds like a winner to me. E, a new technology is described in detail. Is it described in detail? The technology is described in detail? Or is like how it's used and how it has an impact has been described in some detail? I think it's wrong again on the first clause. A new technology is described in detail. I don't think we did that, but let's keep reading. Arguments for and against its use are voiced. Maybe. Recommendations for promoting the widespread use? No, that's definitely horrible. But I also want you guys to see that I think even for E, like you could be like, I don't think we're describing a new technology in detail, right? They're not telling you like how the computer software like is used in trial procedures. They're just saying like it's cool and it like has this kind of impact. But I guess you could make the case that this stuff like the stop and start could be some detail. I just think definitely that third clause though should make you pause for sure. Are we seeing that for this one? Any questions about number 2? No? Okay, and I am happy to go back to number 1 after we do 2 and 3, Justina. All right, let's do number 3. As described in the passage, recreating an accident with a computer-generated display is most similar to which one of the following? So this is my favorite type of question on RC. It's an analogy question where you're being asked to take something that happened in the passage and go and apply it to an entirely new scenario. Answering analogy questions comes in 2 steps. The first thing is you got to think about the framework of what is it that they did in the original scenario in the passage. And when I say framework, I'm talking about it in a general sense, right? In my legal practice class, one of the things we're learning about, one of the things we're practicing how to do is being able to read a case and synthesize what's called a rule from that case and being able to apply it to a new scenario, more specifically to our clients, right? And this is exactly what that's testing, right? So you're being asked to take something from one scenario, like the passage, and then going and applying it to a new scenario. So to do that, you got to come up with a non-fact specific understanding of the passage. So recreating an accident with a computer generated display. So let's start with something simple about that. What's a description we can use to say what a recreating an accident with a computer generated display is? Like, what can we say that it is? In the chat or come off mute, what do you think it is?
Simulation.
I like that, Rich. I think simulation's a great one. What else? Something. And there's no thought police here. I'm not going to criticize how you put this. Using technology to bring something to life, that's excellent. That's another way of saying simulation. Right, Anna? That's a really good one. Let's do one or two more. It's another way to say this in a non-fact specific way. Clayton, yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's kind of like a play or something, telling a story. Like, of course, it's not gonna be 100% accurate, but it's as close, quote unquote, close as you can get.
Right, exactly. I really like that, right? I'm thinking about something like The Crown, right? It's like, it's not going to be accurate, but it's like a rendition of a story. Very cool. I like those. Those are awesome. And the thing I want to make sure I note for you guys is that the way you guys are doing it, you're either in the realm of being in a framework, right? You're thinking about it in an abstract way, or you're doing it the way Clayton is doing it, which is applying it in a scenario that's different, right? That still functions the same way. So that's the 2-step process for analogies. Some students are like totally fine with analogy questions. Other students really struggle with them. So if you're struggling with them, break it down into those 2 steps. Try to put it in a way that's not specific to the passage, and then do what Clayton did. Go and apply it to a new scenario where you're like, oh, hey, this functions the exact same way that it functioned in the passage. Awesome. A, using several of a crime suspect's statements together to suggest that the subject had a motive. Generally, I'm going to be suspicious whenever they use the same circumstances, right? They're still talking about a crime. Generally, I'm going to be a little bit suspicious, but also this is just a plain fact that this is not what was happening, right? We're not combining things to make it make sense. We're taking something, some sort of watered down version in order to understand what the background was. Salma?
Yeah, sorry, I'm a bit sick, but I despise these questions, and so it's like kind of refreshing that you like them. So I like just all the answer choices like threw me off, but for A specifically, I actually ended up choosing A because of the motive part, because I'm like, oh, they did say how it had like a bad effect. Or it could have this like misleading effect. So that's where I thought they were going with it. And like they're using like very deliberate, like they chose statements. Like it's kind of, I'm just throwing words together and then making it seem like you had this motive. And so it's like, yeah, that's what you could do in digital imaging.
Yeah. I think you're on
But
the right
obviously
track.
it's not right.
Yeah, See, the thing is, and I think the reason that you might be struggling with analogy questions is you're thinking about it in a fact specific way, right? You're thinking about how you're taking what happened in the passage, and you're not, it's almost like I don't know, like I've been eating a lot of grapes recently. Like we've been getting these like Costco packs of like grapes, and then like you have to take them all off the stem, and then wash them and stuff, right? And it's actually a very therapeutic process. I like doing it. And then you just see the stem without any grapes on. And I'm not, by the way, in any way trying to insinuate that you're doing something wrong, but the way that you're treating an analogy question is, it's like you're taking only half the grapes off the stem, and then you're throwing the stem with like a bunch of grapes on it away. Right? Or you're trying to use that that stem structure that still has a lot of grapes on it, so you can't even see the structure of what's going on because it's still being blocked by all the fruit that's still on it. Right? So what you got to do is force yourself, and this does not come naturally to everyone. So if you're struggling with it, there's absolutely no shame in that. But you got to force yourself to be like, hey, can I just shake off everything from the passage? Can I just put it in a way that has nothing to do with the passage? It just has to do with the idea that the passage cares about.
Okay. So I guess what's specifically wrong about A then?
Well, what's wrong about A? And let's break this down into a basic structure, right?
Yeah.
We can read A with its own framework too. So A is talking about combining information to get you to a conclusion of some kind. Right? Did we add up anything in the passage?
Like I want to say yes, but it sounds like the answer is no.
Well, here's the thing, Salma. Were we doing any kind of aggregation or adding or combining when it comes to the simulations? Or were we just
I guess
portraying them in
yeah.
a different way?
Yeah, I guess it's I mean, I don't know. In my head, I think of like a video though as like a compilation of like movements and like frames, but I'm thinking about it too technically. So
I think you are thinking about it too technically. So the sort of lesson for you here is to see if you can think about them in, if you had to explain it without using any facts from the passage, how would you put it? And if you had to explain the answer choice without using any of the facts from the answer choice, how would you put it? And if both of those things match, then you have my permission to pick it.
Okay, and then
sense?
the motive part, yes. And the motive part, is it that like do we remove that because it's not part of that, like that was just a criticism later on in like the third paragraph or second, third paragraph?
The motive has nothing at all to do with anything in the passage. The motive may just as well just have been like scribbles, right? It's just some kind of information that's being offered to us because we're combining some things together. That's what A is saying.
But didn't the author, sorry to dwell on this so much, but didn't the author say intentional or unintentional like use?
That's specific, right? Those are specific opinions the author had about what he thought about computer generated displays. That doesn't mean that that's how you recreate an accident.
I understand. Okay, so we're not, we just take what this very like situation, like the framework of, okay, never mind. Thank you.
No, you're doing good. You're asking all the right questions and you're struggling with it, which is what I expect all my students to do. So Harla, you had your hand up. Did I already answer your question, or are you still curious about something?
No, I think I had a click when it did come to this. The analogy, it's the verb that actually throws you. So this is why, to work out the answer to this, although I've worked out, like I've done this passage before, and I did get most of them, like 40, 30, 50% of them correct, but now doing it again. So what I've noticed is, to suggest, the computer generated display was not suggesting. So for A, it says to suggest, it was not suggesting. It was not there to suggest anything. So for B, it was to correct it was not, I don't see that the computer generation was, the computer displays were correcting anything. For C, it was not predicting anything. It wasn't used to predict something. For D, it was not used to, so it's nothing gathering. So it's not about gathering. It's not used to gather, but it is used to exhibit. So that's the only reason why I chose E.
So that's incredibly cool. And that's pretty effective, Saharla. But I do want to ask that you combine it with something else. So I like the verb hunting, right? It's A is to suggest, B is to correct, C is to predict, D is to gather, and then E is to exhibit. Although I could write 5 answers to this question that all say to exhibit, but end in a very different way. So what I'm going to ask you to do is take that verb that you found and combine it with the thing they're trying to accomplish. So in this case, I would want A to be honed in on to suggest something, some kind of information, which is not what the computer generated displays were trying to do.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, because I think to suggest could be quite close to what the passage did, right? That's what the simulations are doing. They're trying to suggest some information or some interpretation, but it's the ending of it that really, really throws you off. But that's actually a really clever way to do this. And so if we go on to B, right? So using an author's original manuscript to correct, right? That verb is wrong enough where I'm like, I don't even need to read the rest of the answer choice to see what you're correcting, but the simulations were never trying to correct anything. Awesome. C, using information gathered from satellite images to predict. That's, again, horrible. And I think Saharla's technique here is really effective because if the verb here is wrong, you're kind of shit out of luck for the rest of the sentence. It doesn't matter what happens in the rest of it. It's still going to be terrible for you. So to predict is wrong, and it doesn't matter what it ends with. But I think with A, the to suggest isn't horribly wrong until you realize they're just trying to find information.
Objection,
D,
Your Honor.
using a video.
Speculation. I would say objection, Your Honor. Speculation or speculative.
Yep.
We're not here
I think that's it.
What might have happened. We're here to state the facts, right? We're not conjuring potential futures here. We're going to stick with the facts.
Yep, exactly. Using a video camera to gather, again, to gather, I think is a horrible verb there because we're not gathering information with it. We're like representing what already happened. And then E says using detailed geological evidence to design. And I also want to point to this here, Saharla, which I think your verb might be to design, right? More than it is to exhibit. So I think it could be design, which doesn't sound right to me. It sounds actually a little bit off, but then the rest of it makes it correct, which is to design a exhibit depicting a recent volcanic eruption, which in context gives me, oh, okay, something that happened is now being represented in some kind of other way.
Yes, you're right. Correct. Definitely. Yeah. It was to design and then followed by, so the end part actually, yeah, thank you.
Yeah. But your brain, I love the way your brain's working on that. That's exactly the kind of way to think about these things, is to make sure that critical aspect of it is correct. Salma.
So just to clarify, if it's asking about the structure of a specific like phenomena or like whatever within a text, and the author hates this thing. Okay, let's just say. We are not using that in the answer choices. If it says like which one is parallel to this phenomena, you don't have to use you shouldn't account for the author's opinion in those answer choices.
Well, your job isn't to do that, right? It's about how, as it's described in the passage, what would this look like is what you're being asked to do. And I think, Salma, you got to take your confidence from how the question is phrased, right? I don't want to give you like, a black and white rule about how you want to do this, is because it can change very specifically based on the wording. So take your guidance from the question. If they're narrowing it down out of the scope of the author's opinion, then you're not in the author's opinion anymore.
Right. Okay, that helps. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, number 5 has a couple of votes, so we'll do that one. And then I know someone's being very patient about number 1, so I'll come back to that one. Or actually, let's do, what is number 1? Yeah, let's do number 5 and then I'll come back to number 1. The author states which one of the following about computer displays used in trial proceedings. This one is just a fact question. They're just asking you what they do, what the author say about computer displays. It's a very straightforward, fact-based answer. A, despite appearances, computer displays offer few practical advantages. Can we stop reading there? I think so, right? Because the author isn't confused about there being practical advantages. They're just like, it's just going to cause a lot of impact that we don't want. B, most critics of computer-generated evidence, so the people that don't like it, argue for banning such evidence in legal proceedings. Do we know anything about most critics? Do we have any way of knowing what most critics think? Nope, not at all. And I want to be clear, B would be a plausible answer. You would almost be crazy for thinking that, they wouldn't think that. But remember, the author has to state it. It has to be in the passage. C, judges should forewarn jurors. Should is the F word on the LSAT. It's a pretty strong word. It's a normative claim, right? It's saying something that the author thinks should happen. So it's a big deal. So judges should forewarn jurors of the potentially biased nature of computer-generated displays. C is what type of answer would you guys think this is? Do we think that this is a weak answer, or do we think that this is a strong answer? And in the chat, what do we think? You can direct message me if you're shy. Strong answer or weak answer, C? Okay. Weak because it says forewarn. Okay. More thoughts. Do we think this is a strong answer, or do we think it's a weak answer in the chat? Okay, I'm gonna lean towards strong here because it says should, right? Just the fact that it says should, I think is strong. And you're correct. It's saying forewarn, but you can strongly forewarn and you can weakly forewarn, right? It depends on how you do it. So should is strong here, and I'm pausing here to make the point that you guys know that generally in RC passages, we're looking for weak answers, right? Because the weaker the answer, the easier it is to prove. However, that is not a hard and fast rule. That does not need to happen in every question. Here's a great example. C is the right answer here, and it's a strong answer, but it's still the right answer because it's exactly what the author told us. Awesome. D, computer displays are used primarily. I can stop reading at primarily. Do we know when they're primarily used or not used? Nope, D is wrong for the exact same reason that B is wrong. Yeah, absolutely, Nick. So generally, and I'll just talk to you, Nick, because you asked the question. What do you think? Do you think it's easier to make, like, if I were to tell you something like, I don't know, there's at least one black swan out there in the world. If I were trying to prove that to you versus saying every swan out there is black, which claim do you think I'll have an easier time proving to you? The first one or the second one? Yeah, exactly. So generally, because these questions are asking you about the passage, the weaker, the narrower the claim is, the more likely it'll fall under the umbrella of the passage, right? And strong claims, they're going to be violent, essentially, right? They're going to be really in your face about it. And the more intense an answer is, the harder it is to prove. But like I just showed you, it's not in every scenario. And here C is the right answer. So I can stop reading D at primarily. It's wrong for the same reason B is wrong. E, litigators who utilize computer-generated displays must ensure, the litigators have to ensure that the opposing side has equal access to such technologies. What's wrong with E? Anyone have any thoughts? Okay, must ensure is strong. You're right about that, Rich, but there's something else going on here too.
I don't think it's the litigators who should ensure this.
Very good, Eduarda. And I think Anna had the exact same thought. It's not the job of the litigators to do this. The passage never said that. All right, so that's what makes E wrong. All right, over to number 1. Thank you for whoever was patiently waiting for this one. Which one of the following most accurately states the main point of the passage? This is a main point question. This is like the holy grail of RC questions. We're being asked, why'd they write this? What did they want us to walk away with? What did they care about? And I think they care here that like, hey, this is a potentially really messy situation and we got to make sure we have guardrails, that we have protections. And that's what's happening here. A, those involved in court trials that take advantage of computer-generated displays as evidence need to take steps to prevent the misuse of this evidence. Now, you might ask, Ala, what's the difference between A in number 1 and E in number 5? Right? Because E was talking about litigators, and A in number 1 seems to be structured really similarly. Anyone have any thoughts about what makes A much, much weaker or much, much different than answer choice E from number 5? Exactly right, Anna. It's those involved in court trials. That's a much gentler answer. That's a much easier answer to prove, to just say just the people involved. So that's like judges, litigators, jurors, like all the people involved, right? They need to take steps. Taking steps is a very weak claim, right? Just take steps. Then I don't know, like putting earplugs could be taking steps, right? It could be anything. It's just about taking some kind of steps. It's not that they have to solve it. It's just take steps. B, the use of computer-generated displays has grown dramatically in recent years. Okay. Did they write this passage to tell me that it's grown dramatically? I don't think so. I think that was just context, because computer aids allow litigators to convey complex information more clearly. If B was the right answer, this passage would be far more reporter style, right? It would just be like, hey, it's gotten really popular because litigators can now convey complex information, which again was just the backdrop here. It wasn't what the author cared about. C, the persuasive nature of computer-generated displays requires is strong here, that the rules governing the use of these displays be based on the most sophisticated principles of jurisprudence. Did we ever talk about the level or the standards of jurisprudence that we need in order to involve computer-generated displays? Notice that's a very specific and very strong claim, right? It's a very specific kind of standard they're looking for. So can't pick C. D, litigators' prudent use of computer-generated displays will result. They're predicting the future. They're being prophets here. They're saying it will result in heightened jury comprehension of complex legal issues and thus fairer trials. First of all, do we know that this is going to happen? No. Do we know that it's going to result in that comprehension of complex legal issues? And no. All we know, I think at some point they said like they can comprehend like boring stuff a little bit better, but I don't think that's specifically legal issues. E, any disadvantages, oof, we're starting on a strong note here. Any disadvantages of computer-generated visual displays can be eliminated. Jesus, did we ever talk about like being able to get rid of it completely? By enacting a number of practical procedures to avoid their intentional misuse. We never talked about how all the disadvantages will go away or can go away with these practical procedures. We just talked about how like, hey, we can maybe limit the damage a little bit. All right. Any questions about this passage? No? Okay, well, we're ending 15 minutes early, so I think I will stick around to answer questions. So if those of you that want to chat, happy to do that. Thank you for a wonderful class. Thank you to Rich, to Eduarda, and to Anna for reading. You guys crushed it. And if you had a good time, please leave me a review. If you didn't have such a good time, let me know how I can improve. I work for you guys. All right, thanks so much.